Hello, my name is David Bollert, and I am a member of the philosophy department at Manhattan College. I hope this video finds you in good health and good spirits. And today I'd like to offer up a few considerations, a few words about wonder. The title of this talk is Wonder in a Time of Change. And really what I'll be doing is kind of offering three different vignettes about wonder. The first will be from Aristotle, and more specifically, what Aristotle has to say about the wonder that nature itself and all that we find in it deserves. The second has to do with human nature, and more specifically, something of a wondrous exchange, a miraculous encounter between the king of Troy, Priam, and Achilles, the hero of heroes for the Greeks, in the last book of Homer's Iliad. And the third has to do with what you might call the wonder of being itself, an ontological wonder. And for that vignette, I'll be drawing upon the work of the 20th century philosopher Martin Heidegger. But before I start with that, I'd like to turn to a poem to kind of set the mood for this. And I'm inspired to do so in part by the wisdom of St. Thomas Aquinas, who in a commentary on Aristotle's Metaphysics notes that the philosopher and the poet share something very important in common, and that is namely a fascination with, a deep-seated interest in wonder. This is here Aquinas' own words. Now the reason why the philosopher is compared to the poet is that both are concerned with wonder. So, bearing that in mind, the name of this poem is When Death Comes, and it is by the American poet Mary Oliver, an accomplished poet who died in 2019, a poet who has kind of an almost uncanny sensitivity for the beauty of nature, and a poet who, amongst other things, found herself in a state of wonder in the presence of nature. So, When Death Comes, by Mary Oliver. When death comes like the hungry bear in autumn, when death comes and takes all the bright coins from his purse to buy me, and snaps the purse shut, when death comes like the measles pox, when death comes like an iceberg between the shoulder blades, I want to step through the door full of curiosity, wondering, what is it going to be like, that cottage of darkness? And therefore I look upon everything as a brotherhood and a sisterhood, and I look upon time as no more than an idea, and I consider eternity as another possibility, and I think of each life as a flower, as common as a field daisy, and as singular, and each name a comfortable music in the mouth, tending, as all music does, towards silence, and each body a lion of courage, and something precious to the earth. When it's over, I want to say, all my life I was a bride married to amazement. I was the bridegroom, taking the world into my arms. When it's over, I don't want to wonder if I have made of my life something particular and real. I don't want to find myself sighing and frightened or full of argument. I don't want to end up simply having visited this world. And so, with those beautiful words of Mary Oliver ringing in our ears, let's turn our attention first to someone who was certainly married to amazement throughout his long and productive life, the great Greek philosopher Aristotle. Be back in a second. Hello, welcome back. So the pre-Socratic philosopher Heraclitus said the following. This is one of the most famous fragments that we have from his work. He said that it is not possible to step twice into the same river. It scatters and again comes together, and it approaches and recedes. And many readers of Heraclitus's work note that this fragment, as well as the other so-called river fragments, there are actually several that deal with rivers, that this fragment doesn't deal with rivers alone, that this instead is an indication of Heraclitus's view of nature itself. Nature in Greek is phusis. That for Heraclitus, the defining feature of nature is change, right? And Aristotle, in defining a natural being, right, the beings that we find in nature, such as, you can see that, it's a depiction of a trout, so imagine a real trout making its way down the Colorado River, or, if you'd like, there we go, see that tree outside our window here, outside our apartment in White Plains. Aristotle defines a natural being as a being that has within itself a principle of motion or change and rest, has within itself a principle of motion or change and rest. And all natural beings, right, whether you're talking about trout, whether you're talking about trees, whether you're talking about human beings, for we indeed are natural beings, all, Aristotle holds, all of them are quite special. He says in his work, Parts of Animals, and here we can almost imagine him lecturing to his students in his school, the Lyceum. He says the following: "For even though some of the animals we study are unattractive to perception," I don't know, as New Yorkers we might think of cockroaches or the rats that we sometimes find in our subway system, "still the nature that has produced them provides amazing pleasures for those who are capable of recognizing the causes and who are naturally philosophers. That is why we must avoid childish complaints about examining the less honorable animals. For in all natural things there is something wonderful." For in all natural things there is something wonderful, right? No matter how grand, let's say, or how humble, right? Whether you're talking about a mighty oak or a dandelion, whether you're talking about a bull elephant or a mouse, all natural things, right? All natural beings are worthy of our wonder. So, in dealing with the pandemic situation, obviously we're all sheltering in place. We're doing our best to follow proper social distancing protocols, right? When you feel a sense of isolation, when you feel a profound disconnect from the order of things, when you're bored, remember, call Aristotle's wisdom to mind. Remember that all things in nature, including yourselves, those that you're currently sheltering in place with, right, your friends perhaps and your family members, if you happen to have a pet, plants in the house, all are worthy of our wonder, and that you too, as a natural being, are worthy of wonder. And that is one of the ways in which you fit in the order of things. You are, by your very nature, according to Aristotle, wonderful. When I return, we will look at a special kind of natural being, the human being, and we'll look at the kind of wonder that one human being can have for another. See you in a minute. Welcome back. So, what is so wonderful about this natural being that we call a human being? Well, one mark of our wondrous nature is the fact that we can, as individuals, both experience wonder and we can also be or serve as the object of wonder on the part of other human beings. And this dynamic, both being a wanderer and a wonder, is something that many, of course, over the centuries have commented on or reflected upon. And this includes two of my favorites, Shakespeare and Homer. I'd like to draw upon these two just a little bit in trying to flesh out this dynamic. So, in turning to Shakespeare first, I'd like to turn to the play The Tempest, and more specifically, a scene between Ferdinand and Miranda, right? Two young individuals making the transition to young adulthood, right? A profound time of change, of course, in our lives, and who are also experiencing another profound type of change. They are changing from beings who had never experienced romantic love to beings who are now in the process of experiencing romantic love. All right? Here, I think it helps to bear in mind that Miranda's very name, a name that Shakespeare coined, comes from the Latin word for wonder, mirandus. And in this kind of following exchange, you'll hear the word admired and admiration. Admiration is a Renaissance synonym for wonder. All right? So, here we go. Ferdinand, no, noble mistress, 'tis fresh morning with me, when you are by at night. I do beseech you, chiefly that I might set it in my prayers. What is your name? Miranda responds, Miranda. Oh, my father, I have broke your hest to say so. Ferdinand admired Miranda, indeed, the top of admiration, worth what's dearest to the world. All right? And of course, here, Ferdinand is kind of punning on Miranda's name. Apparently, Ferdinand knows his Latin quite well. This is a beautiful play that deals, arguably, one of its central themes is wonder. And it perhaps, as beautiful as this kind of scene is, it's perhaps not all too surprising that two young adults, right, would express a certain kind of wonder here at one another in the throes of love. But what about a sense of wonder that can emerge not between budding lovers, but between long-standing enemies, right? And in turning to the last book of Homer's Iliad, book 24, this is exactly what we find, right? If you'll recall, Priam, the king of Troy, has snuck into the Greek camp by cover of night and with the aid of the Olympians in order to attempt to persuade Achilles to return Hector's corpse to Priam, so Priam may take it back to Troy and perform proper funeral rites. We have to remember that the war has been going on, the war between the Trojans and the Greeks has been going on for some 10 years now. So Achilles is the preeminent Greek warrior, and Priam as the king of Troy. These are long-standing enemies, right? They are adversaries in the truest sense of the word. Kind of furthering this, the person who killed Hector, of course, was Achilles. And Hector was the crown prince of Troy and Priam's favorite son. So he's understandably devastated by this. Adding insult to injury, Achilles not only killed Hector, but he has afterwards, he's been desecrating Hector's corpse by dragging it behind his chariot, at first around the city of Troy, and then later around his own camp, in the Myrmidons' camp. Achilles is a Myrmidon. So, and why is Achilles doing that? Because he is still incensed with Hector, even though Hector, as an ensouled human being, is no longer there, it's only his corpse, because Hector killed Achilles' best friend. Hector dispatched Achilles' second self, his beloved Patroclus. All right? So the tension between these two is deep and multi-layered. This makes what ensues in Book 24, right, all the more wondrous. So here, I'm going to read a rather long passage. It's a famous one, and I think it merits reading. So now, at this precise moment, Priam is getting ready to sneak into, and indeed does sneak into, and makes himself known. He sneaks into Achilles' tent and makes himself known to Achilles and the others in the tent. Quote, apart from him and a solitary pair, Automedon and Alcimus, warriors both, were busy at his side. He, Achilles, had just finished his evening meal. The table was still set up. Great Priam entered unnoticed. He stood close to Achilles, and touching his knees, he kissed the dread and murderous hands that had killed so many of his sons. Passion sometimes blinds a man so completely that he kills one of his own countrymen. In exile he comes into a wealthy house, and everyone stares at him with wonder. So Achilles stared in wonder at Priam. Was he a god? And the others there stared and wondered and looked at each other. But Priam spoke, a prayer of entreaty. Remember your father, godlike Achilles. He and I both are on the doorstep of old age. He may well be now surrounded by enemies wearing him down and have no one to protect him from harm. But then he hears that you are still alive, and his heart rejoices, and he hopes all his days to see his dear son come back from Troy. But what is left for me? I had the finest sons in all wide Troy, and not one of them is left. 50 I had when the Greeks came over, 19 out of one belly, and the rest the women in my house bore to me. It doesn't matter how many they were, the god of war has cut them down at the knees. And the only one who could save the city you've just now killed as he fought for his country, my Hector. It is for him I have come to the Greek ships to get him back from you. I've brought a fortune and ransom. Respect the gods, Achilles. Think of your own father and pity me. I am more pitiable. I have borne what no man who has walked this earth has ever yet borne. I have kissed the hand of the man who killed my son. And at this moment, something miraculous happens between these two long-avowed enemies. They both share a moment of mourning, a moment of weeping. Quote, he spoke, and sorrow for his own father welled up in Achilles. He took Priam's hand and gently pushed the old man away. The two of them remembered. Priam, huddled in grief at Achilles' feet, cried and moaned softly for his man-slain Hector, and Achilles cried for his father and for Patroclus. The sound filled the room. All right? So what has happened here? In a nutshell, what's happened is that we've seen a profound change from two human beings who first and foremost define one another as enemies, right? A change from enemies who have been divided by both real and perceived differences. A change from enemies to fundamentally two fellow human beings who've experienced and have to endure the pangs of loss. After this scene, a little bit later on, Achilles, right, agrees to ransom Hector's corpse, to return Hector's corpse to Priam for ransom. And as a good host should do in this culture, Achilles prepares a meal, or has a meal prepared for Priam. And this is when we see kind of the second instance of, or second kind of profound, wondrous exchange between the two. After he'd spoken, swift Achilles leapt up and slaughtered his silvery sheep, and his comrades skinned and prepared it. They carved it up expertly and skewered the pieces on spits, and when the pieces were well roasted, they removed them all. Automaton got loaves of bread and served them out on the table in fine baskets, while Achilles shared out the meats, and they reached out their hands to the good things before them. Then, when all their craving for food and drink had been satisfied, Dardanian Priam gazed at Achilles in wonder, at his size and his bearing. It was like being face to face with a god. And Achilles wondered too at Dardanian Priam, as he gazed upon his dignified looks and took in what he had said. And when they had gazed at one another to their heart's content, Priam, the godlike old man, was the first to speak. Right? This is one of my favorite passages from the Iliad, precisely because it seems utterly appropriate to me that wonder is the proper response for what has exactly happened between Priam and Achilles, a breaking down of barriers that had once separated them, and a recognition that for all their true differences, and there are real differences, of course, what they share in common, right, is perhaps even more important and is worthy, in fact, of our wonder. All right? So I'll return in a minute with a few words about an altogether different kind of wonder, an ontological wonder, and we'll wrap up this long talk. All right? Hi, welcome back. A few concluding remarks. So we started this talk off with a reading of Mary Oliver's poem, When Death Comes. And in this beautiful poem, we saw, amongst other things, the poet hoping for the following. When it's over, I want to say all my life, I was a bride married to amazement. I was the bridegroom taking the world into my arms. We next moved to the ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle, right? Someone who clearly took the world into his arms, perhaps more specifically, took all that he found within the world into his arms, all natural beings. And we saw that for Aristotle, no matter what type of natural being we're talking about, right? No matter its size, no matter its beauty, whether it is humble or whether it is grand, if we pay close enough attention to that natural being, we will come to appreciate, or we should come to appreciate, its intrinsic wondrousness. We then segued to a very special kind of natural being, the human being, right? Us. And in looking at two works, Shakespeare's Tempest and Homer's Iliad, we saw two instances in which human beings were not only the beings who experienced the pathos of wonder, but they were also the objects of wonder on the part of other human beings. In the context of love between Ferdinand and Miranda, we saw a certain kind of wonder that attends that transformative moment, right? Change of a very important kind, the highest order, as well as a wonder that emerges in part or in the context of a sharing and reconciliation of sorts between two long-standing enemies, Achilles and Priam. So what I'd like to finish with is what you might call an ontological wonder, right? A wonder that deals with being as such. Perhaps you would call it a metaphysical wonder, right? A wonder about reality as such. And the wonder I have in mind here is not confined to a natural being. It's not limited to even a very special kind of natural being, the human being, but it deals with, you might call it the totality of things taken as a whole. A wonder that is being pushed to its limits. And the person that I would like to draw from, the thinker that I would like to draw from here, is the great 20th century philosopher Martin Heidegger. And this comes from his work, An Introduction to Metaphysics. And these are the opening lines of the work, the opening lines of Chapter 1. And Chapter 1 is entitled The Fundamental Question of Metaphysics. Not any old question, the fundamental question. Why are there beings at all instead of nothing? That is the question. Presumably, it is no arbitrary question. Why are there beings at all instead of nothing? This is obviously the first of all questions. Of course, it is not the first question in the chronological sense. Individuals, as well as peoples, ask many questions in the course of their historical passage through time. They explore, investigate, and test many sorts of things before they run into the question, why are there beings at all instead of nothing? Many never run into this question at all, if running into the question means not only hearing and reading the interrogative sentence as uttered, but asking the question, that is, taking a stand on it, posing it, compelling oneself into the state of this questioning. In the days and the weeks and the months to come, as we continue to shelter in place, as we continue to practice proper social distancing protocols, I'd like to suggest maybe take note of what Heidegger is saying here. Wrestle with it. Wonder about perhaps the ultimate wonder of all. Why are there beings at all rather than nothing? And I believe if you do so, like Oliver, you will become a bride married to amazement, that you'll become a bridegroom, right, who will take the world, everything you find in the world, and the sheer fact of the world's existence into your arms. Thank you for your time and patience. I apologize. This talk has gone on much longer than I anticipated. I hope I haven't bored you to tears. I wish you and yours, your friends and family, the very best in the days to come. We all miss you, all members of the Manhattan College community, faculty, administrators, support staff. We miss the students, frankly, desperately. And we all look forward to the time, with luck, with hopefully in the not so distant future, where we can once again be in one another's physical presence, share conversation, and perhaps wonder at one another. Take care.